The Phoenix Suns just made a huge trade that could shake up the landscape of the NBA. But how do the Raptors get involved? We're going to have the answer in today's video. Let's get into it. This is Amateur Sports, the YouTube channel dedicated to Toronto Raptors content in videos like this and live streams on the channel. Drop a like if you enjoy and subscribe for more content just like it. Help us on the road to 18,000 subs. We are so close to the milestone. Perhaps this could be the video that pushes us over the top. And today we're discussing how the Raptors get themselves involved as a fourth team in a trade that involves the Phoenix Suns, the Miami Heat, and the Milwaukee Bucks. We're going to have a full explanation of what the trade could look like and a full breakdown of why each team could consider making this trade happen. Because for starters, well, the Raptors have already expressed their desire to become a facilitator in a deal to make this trade happen. And we're really greasing the hinges of this deal happening with the trade that just went down between the Phoenix Suns and the Utah Jazz. Phoenix sends out their 2031 unprotected first-round pick to the Utah Jazz in exchange for 3 first-round picks. Look, they aren't fantastic first-round picks that the Phoenix Suns are getting back, but it's important that they have more than just the one pick at this point. The picks involved, as we see here, are the least favorable in 2025 of Cleveland and Minnesota, and the least favorable of Cleveland, Minnesota, and Utah for 2027 and 2029. So obviously, you look at the Phoenix Suns situation right now. Aging players, expensive players. 2031, they may not be very good. So that could be a very valuable pick. You're getting 3 probably not so great first-round picks in return. Like the 2025 pick is probably going to be the 30th pick of the first round. The other 2 probably won't be very good. It's probably 3 picks that don't really hold much value over just having the 2031 pick from the Suns. However, it's important because now, maybe it looks a little bit better to send out 3 picks to one team, but now also the Suns have the capabilities of sending out picks to different locations, and that's where a 4-team trade could come into play. Now, usually with content I do on this channel, I get sent a lot of mock trades, hey, what do you think about this one? And typically if it's more than 2 teams, if there's ever a report, a rumor, or something about a 3-team trade, it usually ends up being a 0-team trade because they just don't really happen. But with the new CBA, the aprons, the salary restrictions and everything, it's now becoming a little necessary to have extra teams involved in the trade. And this one in particular really does need some extra teams involved potentially, like the Raptors or others. The Raptors have done a great job of making themselves available to do this with the lack of salary given out at the start of the season. They had an extra roster spot available, which they didn't really lock up when they brought in Bruno Fernando. His contract was guaranteed until January, likely with this exact sort of situation in mind. Look, if Bruno Fernando played really well, they could have kept him to the end of the season. But instead, they wiped their hands clean of that contract and now have about $10 million in space before they go into the tax or before they get to the first apron, where they can take back additional salary and an extra roster spot to take back an additional player in this deal. Right now, they're just using that extra roster spot for 10-day contracts, but can absolutely save it for something in the way of a trade. So here is the overall framework for what would need to happen in this trade. So the reason the Suns are trying to move stuff is to get Jimmy Butler, who wants out of Miami. But for the Suns to get Butler, they have to move those 3 picks in order to get him. They also need to get rid of the Bradley Beal contract, and potentially Bradley Beal could end up with the Bucks. Now, the Bucks, if they get Beal, they would have to move Middleton, Portis, and probably Connaughton to get him. Now, they really would have to move off of Middleton and very likely off of Portis and Connaughton as well to make that happen. That's the situation there. Miami involved in this trade now would have to take on Chris Middleton because they're giving away Jimmy Butler. They have to get Chris Middleton in order to justify taking on Middleton, who's regressing at his current age due to injuries and, age. To justify taking on Middleton, they would have to get back players who help them or picks, and probably more looking at players that can actually help them from Miami Heat standpoint. The Raptors in this deal, what they're doing is they're taking on potentially longer salary of 2 years instead of 1 that other teams want to get off of their books for next season. And the Raptors facilitate this by, they take on extra contracts, which maybe they don't really want, but they get picks in return for making it happen. So again, to summarize, the Suns get Butler, have to give away picks to make it happen. The Bucks get Beal, have to give away players to make it happen. The Heat give away Butler to justify that. They have to take back Middleton and other pieces to justify taking on Middleton. The Raptors act as the facilitator, taking on contracts and as well taking on picks in order to do that. Now, the caveat here is that, well, the Bucks really need to not like Beal to make this happen, which I'm not confident they do. And the Heat need to think Middleton is worth it to get rid of Butler, even though they're kind of pushing to make a trade happen. So a lot of different pieces. It's a complicated trade, so let's get a different view on it to better help go through the rest of this video. Now, like I said, guys, this trade is an absolute disaster, but there's a decent framework in place. It's all about placing the puzzle pieces in the right areas to satisfy enough teams. And because it's so complicated, we're switching up the setup here so I have more of a visual to go off of. Like, this is something I can't really do off the top of my head. But the framework for this trade does kind of make sense where, you know, the Suns get their guy, the Bucks get the guy they want, and the Heat take on enough assets to justify it because Butler wants out. So it's a little bit more complicated for the Heat to do this. And in the mix of this, the Raptors become the dumping ground for salary. So your conversation might become, well, you know, what are the Raptors actually get as far as salary dumping is concerned? Well, the Raptors, what is motivating them to make this trade, as I said, it's picks, but also it's important to consider that sometimes you can get a really good player out of salary dumping. Let's go back to the James Harden trade where James Harden was traded. He's been in a lot of trade, but when James Harden was traded to the Brooklyn Nets, let's go to this trade in particular, because to make this trade happen, the Brooklyn Nets were so desperate to get James Harden, they actually traded away Jarrett Allen as a salary dump, an all-star center, what would become an all-star center, and was showing promise for sure. They traded him to Cleveland. Cleveland in this trade were solely in it for salary dumping to pick up some extra assets. Now, man, did they get some good stuff out of this, because they got Jarrett Allen out of the deal. So, yeah, did Cleveland give away a pick as well to make this happen? For sure. They gave away a 2022 first-round pick. They gave away a 2024 second-round pick. But, like, the prize of that was Jarrett Allen. So good players can be moved around in these sorts of trades. That's the important thing to consider when we're looking at these trades. And I've come up with 3 different trades that could kind of work. Maybe not perfect, maybe not going to work, but at least have some sort of framework here for something to happen. And the first one that we have here is where the Raptors get both Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton from the Bucks in the deal. The Suns, I think for all of these, will actually, one of them they won't, but for 2 of these, we'll just get Jimmy Butler, and in this case, they do. Now, for the Suns to do this trade, I don't have the picks in here because that trade with the Jazz still needs to go through, but picks would need to be sent out by the Suns in this specific scenario to make this deal happen. The Bucks would have to take on some extra players because they're sending out 3 in their second apron team. They have to take back 3 players. So the cheapest guys they could find would be Josh Richardson and Garrett Temple. Now, Garrett Temple would be a bit of a strange one, but hey, to make, listen, it took a while to make these happen. Garrett Temple had to go in the deal. Miami's prize for giving away Jimmy Butler, they'd have to like Middleton, as I said, but they also get Boucher, who could help them, add some energy off the bench, and also Davion Mitchell, add some defense to the point guard position. I don't think that's egregious to think they might consider that. I know it says -3 here, but they're in a tough spot, pretty much having to trade Jimmy Butler right now. I think that this framework is decent, but let's look at another one that we have here. Second option that we have now, this is where the Heat would get Bobby Portis in the deal because they don't like Chris Boucher enough to make it happen. Bobby Portis certainly helps this team and really sweetens the deal when you're taking on Chris Middleton. In this case, they still get Davion Mitchell, add some point guard defense there. The Bucks, instead of getting Richardson, I went with Burke. I think it had to be Burks in this one, which, they could go for Richardson or Burks, I guess. They still have to take Temple. In this one, they still get Beal, the Suns still get Butler, and therefore have to give out picks. The Raptors in this scenario maybe are more focused on getting picks out of this deal, and maybe those picks can come from other sources than just the Suns. And maybe in this case, instead of the Heat getting picks, it's the Raptors getting picks because they don't get Portis in this deal, they get Connaughton. So we keep Boucher, like we saw in the first one. We keep Boucher, who we sent out to Miami, instead of getting Portis. But now draft compensation is further in our favor in this scenario here. The third scenario goes a little bit crazier. This is where the Suns can actually get rid of both the Beal and Nurkic salary, which is a bit crazy to think about, but let's just take a gander here. In this case scenario, the Heat, yes, they do have to take that Nurkic salary, but perhaps an even bigger prize is getting Bruce Brown, who can help them potentially immediately, and that salary comes off the books at the end of this year rather than Portis, who has 2 years left on his contract, as we saw in scenario number 2 here. So yes, you could argue Portis' value over Bruce Brown. Maybe it's similar, but in the scenario here, that is 2 years salary that now becomes 1 year salary with Brown. The problem is Nurkic has the 2 year salary. But hey, what if the Heat in this case scenario can get off now the Duncan Robinson salary? Maybe that's something that they're more comfortable doing because they're adding in Chris Middleton. So now, okay, yes, we have to eat Nurkic's salary, but we also now don't have to eat that Duncan Robinson salary. Robinson probably has more effect on an NBA team, but again, like none of these are going to be perfect. It's just these are some consideration the teams might be able to make, and this could work as some sort of framework for a deal to take place. So again, we go back to the trade here. The Raptors now, instead of giving away Boucher and Mitchell, they're now giving away Bruce Brown, who alone has a higher salary than Boucher and Mitchell. And in this case scenario, because they're giving away more salary, they have to take back more. So they get both Bobby Portis, they get both Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton, but now also have to take on Richardson. And listen, Connaughton has struggled this season. He's had a lot of DNPs, but there is shooting ability there. He hasn't shown it a lot. He's shooting under 30%, but there's ability there. And also, Bobby Portis, I think, could help this team for this season and for next season as well. I don't think he'd be thrilled about going to the Raptors, which is why maybe one of the scenarios where Bobby Portis ends up on a team like we saw in some of the other scenarios here, where maybe Bobby Portis ends up on the Heat. That's something that's more desirable to him. But if that's the sticking point, potentially, hey, he just has to end up on the Raptors. They tank the rest of this season. Next year, they try to be a good team. And having Portis coming off the bench, I think, is like a real benefit for this team because I do like Bobby Portis and think could bring a lot. So the Suns get off Nurkic. They get Robinson. They eat Robinson as a return. They have Jimmy Butler here, of course, and they're the ones sending out those 3 picks that they got out of the Utah Jazz trade, and it's dispersed somewhere between this. So again, really difficult to navigate, but I think one of those 3 at the very least, maybe all 3 in some way, provide some sort of framework that can make something like this go down, and the Raptors could become benefactors by, look, I don't think Connaughton is horrible to take on for less than $10 million, and maybe he finds him shooting. The Raptors need shooting. I think he could have a role right away, and even for next season, and they get back draft assets. Maybe it's less draft assets, but you get Bobby Portis, who, look, you're tanking this year, but next year, that could be a helpful player for a team that is trying to make the playoffs. As I said, it feels like there's a lot of puzzle pieces that it's just really hard to try and put together, but I think there's something here that could work. Let's go back to the main view. Complicated, yes. Impossible, probably not. Again, I don't think I've got it perfect how I've done it here, but I think that there's something in here that could work for these teams and something to consider, and I imagine phone calls are going on behind the scenes, but it is an opportunity, whether it be this trade or whether it be other trades for the Raptors, to insert themselves as a 3rd or 4th team to facilitate it and get back a good player. And who knows what could happen from there, and who knows what could happen from the picks that come to the Raptors if they are involved in any sort of way. There is options as well for the Raptors to be cut out of this, and it's just those 3 teams involved. But again, all of this is really complicated. I'm merely presenting you with the things that could happen that involve the Raptors, the possibilities, and why it is important that the Raptors have this space, and how this could be a huge deal for the team to take on perhaps a good player like Portis, Connaughton, who might be able to help them refine his 3-point shooting for him, and whatever could come to them through those picks for the future, especially for a rebuilding Raptors team. That could be something that is significant going forward. But what do you make of the trades that I presented? Or perhaps you have a trade that you want to present yourself. Please do so in the comments down below. It really helps build the channel with the YouTube algorithm. What also really helps when you hit that like button if you did enjoy, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more Raptors content like this. Trade deadline is about 2 weeks away. We're going to have tons of coverage coming at you on Amateur Sports. You can get all that great content in return for your sub, and you can help me on the road to 18,000 subs. I'll see you again next time for another video.